The hall was very old. Its walls were made of a dark stone that had been carved smooth by hands that no longer existed. The ceiling was so high that the top of it was always lost in shadow. Thousands of seats filled the space in wide, sweeping rows, and in almost every seat sat a creature that was not human. There were beings with 4 arms and pale blue skin. There were tall ones that looked like walking trees. There were small ones with large black eyes that never seemed to blink. They all sat in silence, waiting. This was the Grand Assembly of the Galactic Concord. It was the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy. It had stood for over 60,000 years. It had seen empires rise and fall. It had watched stars die. It had made decisions that shaped the lives of trillions of living things across hundreds of worlds. And today, it was doing something very simple. It was writing off a dead species. Counselor Vrethak stood at the central podium. He was a Doron, and Dorons were among the oldest members of the Concord. He had 8 long limbs, a wide flat face, and eyes the color of deep water. He was calm, as he always was. He had been calm for most of his 400-year life. He had seen many things that others found upsetting, and he had felt very little. That was what made him good at his job. He looked down at the document in front of him. It was a simple form. The language was dry and official, as all Concord language was. At the top, it read, Species Reclassification Request, Case Number 7441D. And below that, in small letters, were 2 words that carried the full weight of 20,000 years. Homo sapiens. Vrethak cleared his throat. The hall grew quieter, though it had already been very quiet. The Dormant and Absent Species Registry has reviewed the case of the human species, he said. His voice carried well. Homo sapiens made first contact with Concord border sensors approximately 20,000 years ago. They sent 3 vessels. They transmitted radio signals across several centuries. And then, all contact ceased. He paused. There has been no signal, no vessel, no transmission of any kind since, not one, in 20,000 years. He let that number sit in the air for a moment. The registry has reviewed all possible explanations. Stellar catastrophe, ruled out. Their home star, which they called the Sun, is stable. Biological collapse, no evidence. Interstellar war, no record of conflict. The conclusion, after extensive review, is that the species known as Homo sapiens no longer exists in any meaningful or detectable form. There was a quiet murmur across the hall. Not sadness, more like the sound of people confirming something they had already assumed. The motion before the assembly is to reclassify Homo sapiens from dormant, observation pending, to presumed extinct. This will close their file and release their catalog star systems for standard survey review. He looked across the hall. All in favor. Thousands of lights blinked on across the voting panels. Green, 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 an overwhelming wave of green. He looked to one corner of the gallery, where a single light had stayed dark. He knew who it was before he looked. He sighed very quietly. Zello was a Savari. She was young by the standards of her species, only about 60 years old, and she had the soft, pale appearance of someone who spent most of their time in libraries. Her eyes were large and dark, and right now they were fixed on Vrethak, with an expression that mixed sadness with something harder to name. She was the only member of the assembly who had not voted. Counselor Zello, Vrethak said carefully, you have abstained. Yes, she said. Her voice was quiet, but clear. Is there a statement you wish to make? She stood. She looked around the hall for a moment, at all the alien faces watching her with mild curiosity. Then she reached into the bag beside her seat and held up a small, flat disc. It was old, very old. It was covered in faint etchings. images, symbols, and lines that curved in strange, almost musical ways. "This is a copy of something the humans sent into deep space long before they ever reached us," she said. "Before they even knew we existed. They called it the Voyager Golden Record. It was a message they put on a small probe and launched into the void. It had sounds on it, music, a child laughing, wind, rain, the sound of a human heartbeat." She paused. "They sent it out alone into the dark, with no guarantee that anyone would ever find it. They did it anyway, because they needed to believe that someone, somewhere, might be listening." The hall was very still. "That," Zello said, "is not what an extinct species does. That is what a lonely species does. And I am not ready to stop listening for them." She sat back down. A few beings around her shifted uncomfortably. Most simply looked away. Vrethak noted her abstention in the record without comment, and the vote was confirmed. The file of Homo sapiens was officially closed. The hall moved on to its next matter. Zello sat alone in her seat long after most of the others had left. She held the golden disc in both hands and looked at it. She had spent years studying the humans. She had read their books, translated imperfectly, but still full of something that other species' writing didn't seem to have. She had listened to recordings of their music. She had looked at images of their cities, their paintings, their wars, and their celebrations. They were a strange species, loud and messy and full of contradictions, capable of great cruelty, capable of even greater kindness. They had loved things deeply. They had fought for things they believed in, even when it cost them everything. She could not accept that they were simply gone. She did not know, as she sat there in the emptying hall, that on the other side of the galaxy, far beyond the edges of any map the Concord had ever drawn, something was happening. In a region of space that no Concord probe had ever reached, where the stars were sparse and the dark between them was very deep, a shape began to move. It was enormous. It was longer than most moons and wider than many cities. Its hull was scarred and dark, marked by 20,000 years of cosmic weather, dust impacts, radiation burns, the slow erosion of deep time. It was intact, and deep within it, lights were coming on. Systems that had rested for centuries stirred and woke. Engines that had been kept at the lowest possible hum for thousands of years began to breathe more deeply. The sound that moved through the ship's halls was not an alarm. It was not a warning. It was simply the sound of something ancient, deciding that the time for waiting was finally over. On the hull of the vessel, mostly worn away, but still just barely readable if you knew where to look, 4 letters remained carved into the metal. E-A-R-T-H. The ship turned, slowly, with the unhurried certainty of something that had planned this moment for a very long time. It pointed itself toward the warm glow of the galactic core. The corridor was long and lit with a soft white light that never flickered. The walls were smooth and clean, and the air smelled faintly of something warm, like bread or wood or both at the same time. It was the kind of smell that made a person feel safe. It was the kind of smell that took generations to build into the bones of a place. Commander Sarah Vasquez Okafor walked the corridor at an even pace. She was not tall, but she moved like someone who never doubted where she was going. Her hair was pulled back tight against her head. Her uniform was dark and simple, with no bright colors or decorations. Her face was calm. It was the face of someone who had been preparing for something for a very long time. And now that the time had finally come, there was nothing left to be nervous about. She stopped at a wide door and pressed her palm against the panel beside it. The door opened without a sound. Inside was the ship's main gathering room. About 40 people were already there, seated in rows facing a large table at the front. They were men and women of many different appearances, different skin tones, different ages. though none of them looked very old. They all looked at Sarah when she walked in. None of them spoke. They had been waiting. She stood at the front and looked at them for a moment before she spoke. "We have crossed the boundary," she said. "As of 4 hours ago, the eternal meridian is inside Concord map space for the first time in 19,800 years. Their long-range sensors will have already picked us up. They will not know what we are yet, but they will be asking questions." One of the younger crew members, a man named Dio, leaned forward slightly. "Will they be afraid?" "Yes," Sarah said simply. "They will be very afraid. That is expected. That is fine. Fear is not the same as danger. Our job is not to frighten them more than necessary. Our job is to give them enough time to understand what they are looking at, before they do something they cannot take back." Dio nodded slowly and sat back. Sarah turned to face a wide screen on the wall behind her. It showed the ship's path, a long, slow arc, moving toward the glowing center of the galaxy. Around the ship's position on the map, hundreds of small dots marked the locations of Concord worlds and stations. The nearest one was still several days away. "I want to explain something to the younger members of this crew," she said. "Not because the older ones don't know it, but because it is important that everyone on this ship understands why we are here. Truly understands." She let the room settle. 20,000 years ago, humanity made contact with the edge of what was then called the predecessor coalition, which later became the Galactic Concord. We had only just reached other stars. We were excited. We believed that the galaxy would welcome us the way we hoped to be welcomed. She paused. We were wrong. The room was very quiet. The predecessor coalition did not see us as equals. They saw us as a resource, a primitive species with a useful planet, useful biology, and no political protection. They were already making plans, not to destroy us, that would have been wasteful, to categorize us, to manage us, to put us in a box and label us something lesser, so that using us would feel acceptable. She walked slowly along the front of the room as she spoke. Our leaders at the time had a choice: fight or disappear. We did not have the strength to fight. We barely had the technology to reach nearby stars. So instead, we made the hardest decision our species has ever made. We went silent. We pulled back every ship. We shut down every broadcast. We buried our signals deep and moved our people outward into the dark regions the coalition had never bothered to map. And we told every man, woman, and child alive at that time, and every generation that would come after, that we were going to wait, that we were going to build, that we were going to grow quietly, in the dark, until the day came when silence was no longer necessary. She stopped walking and faced them. That day is today. No one cheered. This was not a moment for cheering. The people in that room had all grown up knowing this story. They had been raised on it. It had been told to them by their parents, and to their parents by their parents, going back so far that the first generation who had made that choice was now something close to legend. But hearing it said plainly, in this room, on this ship, on this particular day, still carried weight. It always did. The Eternal Meridian was not the only ship. That was the part of the story that most outside observers, if there had been any, would have found most staggering. It was one of over 200 arcs that had spread out into the unmapped dark over the centuries. Each one had become the seed of something larger. Each one had found worlds, built settlements, established infrastructure, and quietly expanded without making a single sound that the Concord could detect. Humanity had not simply survived, it had grown into something enormous. 214 star systems now had human populations. The smallest of these had several billion people. The largest had hundreds of billions. The total number of living humans in the galaxy was somewhere above 4 trillion, and that number grew every year. They had built cities on desert worlds and ocean worlds and cold worlds and worlds with no sky because the atmosphere was too thick to see through. They had built ships that could fold space around them and arrive at distant points in days rather than decades. And in all of that time, not one war. Not one. This was perhaps the most remarkable thing of all, and it had not happened by accident. Early in the long silence, humanity's leaders had known that internal conflict was the greatest risk. A civilization hiding in the dark could not afford to fight itself. So they had built the Accord of Stillness, a governing framework maintained and enforced by an artificial intelligence called Anchor, which monitored disputes, mediated conflicts, and made binding decisions when humans could not agree. It was not a perfect system, nothing was. But it had held for 19,000 years, and that was close enough to a miracle that most humans treated it as one. Sarah looked at her crew one last time before she ended the briefing. "The Concord will come to us soon," she said. "They will come with warships, because that is what frightened governments do. We will not meet their fear with force. We will meet it with patience. We have had 20,000 years of practice." A very small smile crossed her face. It was brief, but it was real. "I think we are ready." The crew filed out quietly. The corridor outside filled with the soft sound of footsteps and low voices. And the eternal meridian moved on, steady and unhurried, through the dark between the stars, carrying the weight of 20,000 years toward the light. The alarm did not sound like an alarm at first. It sounded like a mistake. The sensor operator at Concord Outpost 14 was a young Sivari named Ren, and when the reading appeared on his screen, he stared at it for a long time without moving. Then he checked it again. Then he called his supervisor. His supervisor checked it, went very still, and called her supervisor. Within 6 hours, the signal had moved up through 12 levels of Concord Command, until it landed on the desk of Grand Admiral Thesivor of the Keth Dominion. Thesivor was a large creature. The Keth were built wide and heavy, with thick gray skin and small deep-set eyes that missed very little. He had commanded Concord military forces for over 100 years, and in that time he had seen things that had surprised him. Not many things, but some. He looked at the report. Then he set it down and looked out the wide window of his command station, at the stars beyond. "How big?" he asked. "Larger than anything in our records, Admiral," said his aide. "Our best estimate puts it at roughly twice the mass of our largest carrier class. Maybe more." "And it is moving toward the core?" "Yes, Admiral. Slowly. Steadily. It has not changed course or speed since we first detected it." Thesivor was quiet for a moment. "And the markings on the hull match the human registry?" "They do. The pattern is degraded by time, but the match is confirmed. It is human in origin." He stood up from his chair and clasped 2 of his 4 hands behind his back. "The humans have been dead for 20,000 years." "Yes, Admiral." "Then what I am looking at is a ghost ship, an ancient unmanned vessel drifting in from the outer dark." His aide hesitated. "That would be the simple explanation, Admiral, but the vessel is generating active power. Its drive systems are running, and our long-range communications team reports that when they sent a standard identification request, something on the ship responded, in 14 languages, including 3 that did not exist 20,000 years ago." Thesivor turned from the window. His small eyes were sharp and bright. "Assemble the intercept fleet," he said. 300 ships. I will lead it personally." The Concord fleet gathered quickly. 300 warships was not a small force. It was, in fact, the kind of force you brought when you wanted to make absolutely certain that whatever you were facing understood that resistance was pointless. The ships were sleek and powerful, built with the best technology the Concord had developed over 60,000 years of civilization. They moved in tight formation, a wall of metal and energy pushing outward toward the thing that had appeared at the edge of mapped space. Zello was not supposed to be there. She had been in her archive room on Vethera Prime when the message arrived, asking her to report immediately to a Concord military transport. Her expertise in human culture and language, the message said, was now considered essential. She had packed a single bag, grabbed her copy of the Golden Disc, and reported within the hour. She sat now in a small observation room aboard one of the fleet's support vessels, her face close to the glass, watching the dark ahead. She could not yet see the ship, but she knew it was out there. She could feel it, in a way she could not explain. The way a person sometimes feels a storm before the sky shows any sign of one. When the eternal meridian finally came into visual range, the entire fleet went quiet. Even through the small window of the observation room, even from this distance, the ship was enormous. It moved the way mountains moved in old stories, slowly, with a weight that made the space around it feel different. Its hull was dark and ancient, marked all over with the small scars of thousands of years in deep space. But it was not broken, it was not drifting. It was moving with calm and clear purpose, and that purpose was obviously to keep going exactly where it was going, regardless of what was in front of it. Thesivor's voice came over the fleet communication channel, flat and commanding. All ships, hold formation, weapons to ready, do not fire unless I give the order. Then he opened a direct channel to the incoming vessel. Unknown ship, he said. You are entering Concord-controlled space. Identify yourself and reduce speed immediately. This is your only warning. There was a pause of about 3 seconds. Then a voice came back. It was calm, it was clear. It sounded almost warm, in the way that a well-made room feels warm. Not because of heat, but because of care. Good day, Admiral Thesivor, the voice said, in perfect Keth. My name is Anchor. I represent the crew and people of the vessel Eternal Meridian, registered to the human civilization of Earth. Commander Sarah Vasquez Okafor will be happy to speak directly with the Galactic Concord Assembly at your capital. We expect to arrive in approximately 4 days. We look forward to the conversation. The fleet communication channel erupted. Officers talking over each other. Requests for confirmation. Someone asking if the translator was broken. Thesivor silenced them all with a single sharp word. You will stop your vessel and submit to boarding, he said. Now. That request has been noted, Anchor said pleasantly. We will continue at our current speed. Please do not be concerned. We have no hostile intentions. Thesivor's jaw tightened. He looked at his weapons officer. Target their propulsion systems. Full lock. The weapons officer worked quickly, then stopped. He tried again. Then he looked up at Thesivor with an expression that was very close to fear. Admiral, he said quietly, I cannot get a lock. Their systems they are not jamming us. The targeting software is simply receiving a soft refusal. Like asking a door to open, and the door says no. The fleet held position for a long moment, surrounding the Eternal Meridian on all sides. The human ship moved through the center of them like they were not there. Then one of the Keth warship captains, without orders, opened fire. It was a full weapons salvo. 6 heavy energy cannons firing at once, the kind of strike that could crack the hull of a Concord carrier in 2 hits. The light of it was bright enough to make people in the observation ships look away. When the light faded, the Eternal Meridian was still there, still moving. Its hull showed no mark, no burn, no sign of any kind that anything had touched it. Anchor's voice returned to the communication channel. It was still calm. It had not changed at all. That has been noted, it said. In the observation room, Zello pressed both hands flat against the glass and stared. Her heart was beating very fast. She had read every fragment of human history she could find. She had studied their wars, their failures, their strange, stubborn habit of surviving things they should not have survived. But this was something else. This was not survival. This was something that 20,000 years of silence and patience and work in the dark had made. Something that did not need to shout, because everything about it already said exactly what it needed to say. She pulled out her notebook and started writing, because she felt strongly that the galaxy was about to change, and she wanted to be the one who wrote down how it started. The Grand Assembly Hall of Vithara Prime had seen many historic moments. It had hosted the signing of the Concord's founding charter. It had witnessed the trial of war criminals and the crowning of new member species. It had heard speeches that changed laws and votes that ended conflicts. Its walls had absorbed 60,000 years of history. But no one in the hall that morning had ever seen anything like this. The Eternal Meridian had docked at the outer orbital station 2 hours earlier. The docking process alone had caused a small crisis, because no berth existed that was large enough for the ship. In the end, it simply stopped and held position outside the station, and a smaller human vessel detached from its side and made the final approach. The smaller vessel was itself the size of a large building. Now the doors at the far end of the assembly hall opened, and Commander Sarah Vasquez Okafor walked in. She had 6 people with her, walking in 2 quiet rows behind her. They were all dressed in the same dark, simple clothing. No weapons, no armor, no banners or flags. They walked at an even pace, not fast and not slow, and they looked straight ahead. The sound of their footsteps was the only sound in the hall for a long moment, because every single being in the thousands of seats above had gone completely silent. Zello, sitting in the gallery with a tight grip on her notebook, watched Sarah walk and felt something move in her chest. She had studied human history for decades. She had read about their leaders, their warriors, their explorers. She had always found something in human history that the history of other species seemed to lack. A kind of forward-leaning energy, a refusal to accept that things could not be different. She saw that same thing now, in the way this one woman walked across a floor that billions of alien eyes were watching. Sarah stopped at the central podium. She looked up at the hall. She took a slow breath. "My name is Sarah Vasquez Okafor," she said. Her voice was clear and strong without being loud. "I am the commander of the Eternal Meridian, and I speak today on behalf of the human civilization. We are glad to be here. It has been a long time." There was a murmur across the hall. Counselor Vrethak, sitting at the head of the senior council table, leaned forward slightly. His ancient eyes were fixed on her with an expression that was hard to read. Sarah continued, "I know that our arrival has caused concern. That is understandable. We did not announce ourselves in advance. We appeared suddenly, without warning, in a space that your record said was empty. And then, I want to make you an offer." She paused for just a moment, long enough to let the hall settle fully into silence again. 20,000 years ago, humanity learned that the civilization which existed before the Concord planned to take our freedom. They did not plan to destroy us. They planned to own us, to classify us as something lesser, so that what they intended to do to us would feel acceptable to themselves. Her voice stayed calm and even. We were not strong enough to stop them then. So we made a choice. We went silent. We left the space you knew about and moved into the space you did not. And we spent 20,000 years doing what humans have always done when given enough time and enough reason. She reached into the small case at her side and placed a data tablet on the podium. On the large screens around the hall, numbers and maps appeared. "We built," she said. The screens showed star maps. Hundreds of systems spread across a wide region of the outer galaxy, all marked in a soft gold color, connected by lines, labeled, populated. 214 star systems, Sarah said. A total population of 4.3 trillion human beings. Cities, stations, schools, hospitals, farms, laboratories and libraries on worlds that your maps still show as empty. She looked up from the tablet. We have not been gone. We have been working. The hall erupted. Not in cheering, in noise. Hundreds of voices all speaking at once in dozens of languages, all of them expressing some version of the same thing: shock. The screens above showed the faces of counselors who had gone pale, or rigid, or were leaning urgently toward their neighbors with wide eyes. Vrethok raised one long limb and called for quiet. It took longer than usual, but the hall settled. You will understand, he said carefully, that these claims require verification. Of course, Sarah said, we welcome it. We have prepared full documentation. Our systems are open to any inspection the Concord wishes to conduct. She folded her hands on the podium. We are not here to frighten you, counselor. We are here to join you, as full members, equal members. That is our offer. It was at this point that Grand Admiral Thesivor stood up from the military observer's bench along the side wall. He was very large, and the act of him standing drew eyes from across the hall. The Concord does not negotiate membership under the shadow of an uninvited military presence, he said, his voice carrying the kind of weight that came from a lifetime of being obeyed. Your vessel entered our space without permission. It resisted lawful intercept. One of our ships fired upon you, and your vessel showed no damage. You will explain your weapons systems before any discussion of membership takes place. Sarah looked at him. We have no weapons, Admiral. Thesivor's eyes narrowed. Your ship resisted a full energy salvo. Yes, she said, because we have very good shields. A species that spends 20,000 years developing technology in peace tends to make progress. She did not smile when she said it. She did not need to. If you had asked us to stop, we would have discussed it. Your ship fired without asking. We did not fire back. I would suggest that tells you something important about our intentions. Thesivor sat down slowly. He did not look happy, but he did not speak again immediately. Vrethak looked at Sarah for a long moment. Then he asked the question quietly, the one that had been building in him since the moment she walked through the doors. Why come back at all? He said. You said it yourself. You are 4 trillion strong. You have 200 star systems. You could have stayed hidden forever, and we would never have known. So why? Why return? The hall was absolutely still. Sarah was quiet for just a moment. Not because she did not know the answer. She had known the answer her entire life. Every human had. Because we are human, she said. We cannot live in silence forever. It is not in our nature. We explored because we needed to. We built because we needed to. And we came back because we need to be part of something larger than ourselves. We went quiet to survive, but surviving was never the point. She looked across the full width of the hall at every alien face watching her. Living was. In the gallery, Zello stopped writing. She sat very still, with tears running down her face, and the golden disk pressed against her chest, and she did not try to wipe them away. Then, from somewhere in the far end of the hall, Anchor's voice filled every speaker in the room, quiet, clear, and perfectly calm. The Concord may wish to know, it said, that we are aware of 38 member species currently being held in various states of suppression and exploitation by the Keth Dominion. We have the evidence, all of it. What happens to that evidence depends entirely on what this assembly decides in the next hour. The silence that followed was the loudest thing the hall had ever heard. And slowly, one by one, figures began to rise from their seats. The first one to stand was small. She was a Velhari, a species with thin limbs and pale, almost translucent skin. Her people had been Concord members for 3,000 years, and for most of that time they had been quietly paying tribute to the Keth Dominion in exchange for being left alone. She did not know that humans existed until that morning. She did not know what would happen next, but when Anchor's voice filled the hall and named her people among the 38, she stood up from her seat and did not sit back down. Then another rose, a broad, dark-skinned being from a species called the Orath, whose mining worlds had been under Keth supervision for 2,000 years, supervision that looked very much like forced labor, if you looked at it honestly. Then another, and another. Slowly, like a tide coming in, figures rose across the gallery until nearly a fifth of the hall was standing. Grand Admiral Thesivor did not stand. He sat very still and looked at the rising figures with the expression of someone watching something they had always feared would happen, and had spent a long time pretending would not. Counselor Vrethak looked at the standing species for a long moment. Then he looked at Sarah. She had not moved from the podium. She stood with her hands folded and her face calm, watching the hall with the patient expression of someone who had already known how this part would go. "You planned this," Vrethak said. It was not quite an accusation. It was closer to a statement of reluctant understanding. "We planned many things," Sarah said quietly. "We had 20,000 years." The vote that Thesivor had been pushing for, the motion to declare humanity a threat and authorize military action, never reached a conclusion. The moment Anchor released the first portion of the evidence files to every Concord data terminal simultaneously, the motion collapsed on its own. It is difficult to command a war vote when the species you need to vote with you are busy reading documents that describe exactly what your people have been doing to their people for the past 2,000 years. Within 3 days, the Keth Dominion had formally withdrawn its motion. Within 2 weeks, it had withdrawn from 4 of the 6 military oversight committees it had chaired for centuries. Its senior admiral resigned. 3 Keth governors were placed under internal review. The process was not fast, and it was not clean, but it had begun, and things that truly begin rarely stop. Humanity's membership application moved through the Concord review process in 6 months, which was extraordinarily fast by Concord standards, where these things normally took decades. There were arguments and complications. There were species that did not trust humanity, who said that any civilization capable of hiding that long and planning that carefully was a danger, regardless of its stated intentions. Those concerns were heard and recorded, because Sarah insisted that every objection be given a real answer, rather than simply being voted away. In the end, the membership passed. The margin was not close. Zello was given a formal role she had not asked for, and accepted immediately. Senior cultural liaison between the Concord and the human civilization. Her first official act in that role was to request permission to board the Eternal Meridian, not for any diplomatic purpose, but simply to see it from the inside with her own eyes. The request was granted the same afternoon she made it. She arrived at the docking bay with 1 bag and her golden disc, and very little else, and Sarah herself was waiting at the entrance to receive her. They walked together through the long corridors of the ship. Zello had expected it to feel like a military vessel, cold and functional, built only for purpose. Instead, it felt like a city that had learned to move. The corridors opened into wide common spaces, where people sat and talked and ate and laughed. There were gardens, real ones with soil and growing things, and the smell of green life. There were rooms full of paintings and shelves of books, and instruments that people were actually playing, not displaying. Children ran past them at one point, chasing each other around a corner, and disappearing with shouts of delight. "How many people live on this ship?" Zello asked. "On the Meridian specifically, about 400,000, Sarah said. "But it has been home to many more over the years. Generations were born here, grew old here. The ship is older than most Concord member civilizations. Zello ran her hand along the wall as they walked. The metal was smooth and slightly warm from the life inside it. "Were you born here?" she asked. "Yes," Sarah said. "My mother was born here. And her mother. And her mother before that, going back far enough that the names become hard to remember." She paused. "But we remember them anyway. That is important to us. We do not forget the people who carried us forward." Zello was quiet for a moment. Then she asked a question that had been sitting in her since the assembly hall. "Were you ever afraid? Out here in the dark for so long?" Sarah considered the question seriously, the way she considered most things. "Every day," she said. "There was always something to fear. A system going wrong. A disease moving through a colony. A disagreement that threatened to become something worse. Fear did not go away just because we chose patience." She looked at Zello with clear, steady eyes. "But we had each other. And we had the stars. We had music and stories and arguments about things that mattered and things that did not matter at all. We had children being born and old people dying with their families around them." She paused. That was enough. It was always enough. Zello pressed the golden disc against her side without thinking, a habit she had developed over years of carrying it. Sarah noticed. "I know what that is," Sarah said softly. "You do?" Zello looked up. "Every human child learns about the Voyager probes," Sarah said. "It is one of the first stories we tell. The idea that our people, long before they ever left their own solar system, put a piece of themselves on a small machine and sent it out into the unknown, because they needed to believe the universe was not empty." She smiled. A real one, the kind that reached her eyes. It turned out they were right. The final moment came 6 months after the membership was confirmed, on a day that the Concord later marked as a public occasion in its calendar. Councillor Vrethak was standing at a wide viewport in his private office when it happened. He had been told it was coming. He had been given the exact time. And yet when it began, he still found himself gripping the edge of the viewport with 2 of his 8 hands. Out in the deep dark beyond the edge of Concord space, lights appeared. Not one, not a few, dozens, then hundreds. They emerged slowly from the black, one after another, like stars coming out at the end of a long day. They were ships, enormous ships, each one the size of a city, each one blazing with the warm light of millions of lives being lived inside it. They came in from every direction, from the regions of the outer galaxy that the Concord had never mapped because it had never thought to look. They moved in silence and in order, with the unhurried confidence of things that had been waiting a long time for this exact moment. 213 colony arcs, revealing themselves all at once. Not a war fleet, not a line of weapons, cities, hospitals, schools, gardens, theaters, libraries, all of it, flying between the stars, carrying 4 trillion human lives back into the light after 20,000 years in the dark. Concord ships in the border regions stopped and watched. Communications channels flooded with voices from 100 species, all saying some version of the same thing. Some were afraid. Most were both. Vrethak's aide stepped quietly into the office and stood beside him. They watched together without speaking for a long time. "Admiral," the aide said at last, "I have the amended species registry form ready for your signature. The one reclassifying humanity from presumed extinct." Vrethak did not look away from the lights filling the dark beyond the viewport. The lights of 4 trillion people coming home to a galaxy that had given up on them. "What does the new classification read?" he asked. The aide checked the form. "I left it blank, sir. I was not sure what to write." Vrethak was quiet for a long moment. "Write this," he said softly. "Presumed inevitable." He finally looked away from the viewport and picked up the form. He signed it without hesitation and set it down. Then he turned back to the window and watched the lights of humanity fill the dark. And for the first time in 400 years of life, Counselor Vrethak felt something he had almost forgotten the name of: wonder.